Good morning and welcome to the Bangalore International Centre. Our program this morning, titled Not Just a Laughing Matter on Abu Abraham's cartoons, is part of the ongoing exhibition Abu's World, celebrating Abu Abraham in his centenary year. Abu Abraham's career as a cartoonist, columnist, and artist spanned over 50 years, from the late 1940s to the early 2000s, during which his work appeared in a range of newspapers and magazines, leading publications in India and the UK. Throughout this period of significant political change and upheaval, he critically responded to the political landscape, producing a rich and complex oeuvre that reflects these shifts and captures the zeitgeist of the times in his prodigious output that includes political cartoons, illustrations, caricatures, comic strips, travel drawings, portraits, and whimsical sketches. If you have not seen the exhibition yet, please do go upstairs to the gallery after this panel discussion and take a look. Our first speaker today is Janaki Nair. Janaki was Professor of History at the Center for Historical Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, until her retirement in January 2020. Her books include Women in Law in Colonial India, Miners and Mill Hands, Work, Culture and Politics in Princely Mysore, and The Promise of the Metropolis, Bangalore, 20th Century. She's published widely in national and international journals and served on the editorial boards of Journal of Women's History and Urban History. She's also held visiting appointments at the University of California, Berkeley, the University of Würzburg in Germany, the German Historical Institute, London, and Azim Premji University in Bengaluru. I now invite Janaki Nair on stage to present Abu Abraham through a historian's eyes.
Let me start by thanking my two very good friends, people I'm very close to, for having invited me to be part of this effort. I feel some ownership of this effort because I've been part of it ever since the work on the exhibition began. And I accepted the task of doing the annotations for the cartoons in the mistaken belief that it would be a really easy job and that it would take me no more than 1 or 2 weeks. But it in fact ended up being an extremely challenging and extremely rewarding job. I had been teaching in Bangalore a course called Understanding Contemporary India, Post-Independence History of India since 47, and I thought it'll be relatively easy to slot. I had used many of Abu's cartoons in the course of teaching this course, and I thought it would be relatively easy to put these captions into a framework and context for a public that may not be aware of the decades that he so well covered. But as I said, this was a much more challenging task than I imagined, and it has been an extremely interesting journey for me as a historian to go through these cartoons, to use them not just for teaching, but also for thinking about not just the times he spoke about, but also our contemporary. So let me, since I have very little time allotted and there are many speakers to follow, just say a few points about the exhibition from the perspective of somebody who is working on modern and contemporary India. My personal engagement, as I said, is with the cartoons as a historical resource. But having said that, let me start by saying they are not just documentary. In fact, they're not probably documentary as such at all, and that's perhaps why many historians of post-independence India have not used too many cartoons as illustrations in their books. I'm giving the example of Ram Goa has used one cartoon in his illustrations, but most of the time he relies on photographs. Others, such as Joya Chatterjee and so on, also have restricted their use of cartoons. But there is an increasing turn to cartoons by younger scholars today, partly because, as I said, they're not just documentary, they're not just fixing, as it were, a historical moment, but they are equally an editorial comment. And the sharpness of the editorial comment, so you have to appreciate the cartoonist for having to do two things at the same time, not only to present this editorial comment on a contemporary event, but also to accompany it with satire, wit, irony, and so on, of which, of course, Abu Abraham was the master. I should also just quickly interject here that I had the pleasure of knowing Abu Abraham through his writings. When I was a sub-editor at Deccan Herald, I had to edit his private view column, but I also had occasion to meet him, and we were a small mutual admiration society, because he also appreciated my sense of humor. But I'm saying that it is therefore quite difficult to annotate his cartoons, because we don't necessarily know the entire context in which he is making his comment, and he is sharpening his wit against what was he sharpening his wit. For example, in the famous cartoon over which I think I spent something like 3 days, on judicial transfer, who was he sending up? Was he sending up the judges, or was he making some kind of comment on Indira Gandhi, who he liked to portray as a young girl in many of his cartoons, and I'll come to that in just a moment, who was cocking a snook, as it were, at these 3 judges, referring famously to the judges' transfer case of the 1980s. I think when we see this exhibition, we should also be conscious of the fact that there is rich referencing by Abu Abraham on several kinds of genres of work. To begin with, he referred to works of literature. I did not see it. I went hastily through the exhibition this morning, and I didn't see that particular cartoon up, but I may be wrong. One in which he refers to the famous poem of Robert Frost, which is about, miles to go before I sleep, the famous poem of his, which he inverts. I had to look this up to find that it's a figure of speech called an anti-metaboly, inverting the original in a very clever way to make it obviously funny. Secondly, there are often biblical references. Referring, for example, to the Telangana movement of the late 60s, he asked, that famous one about God, what God has joined together, no man should put asunder. He inverts that and makes it into something that men have ordained on themselves. Thirdly, there is a very interesting way in which there is a cross-referencing of contemporary political language, words that came into political parlance as a consequence of important politicians who made use of them. I'm referring, for example, any of you who were around in the 60s will remember this from Kamaraj, Agartum Pakalam. And it became a very common thing to cite that for somebody who says, okay, let's see. You know how the word let's see is used in India. It basically means deferring a decision till the really ultimate moment. But he was able to use those kinds of phrases which had come into circulation in political language to very good use in his cartoons. There were also, fourthly, the more common inversions, what I call common inversions, again, of very famous works of literature. The cartoon which shows L.K. Advani hard at work on his book called The Story of My Experiments with the Trishul. And you don't need to say much more, because if you know the original reference, you know that this was indeed something that was very far away from the original person and the original text that was his product. He was, in addition, the master of the pun. I do not know of another cartoonist, but I stand to be corrected. There are more eminent people in this audience here. We will be followed soon by Uni, who is himself a cartoonist, who deployed the pun to such effective use. The 2 famous ones, which I'm sure many of you are already familiar with, being Vote Your Caste Here, and this is a good censor of humor during the emergency. Finally, and this is not exhaustive a list at all, he referenced other very significant events of the year or the time or the moment. So, in some ways, he gives you a historical context within the cartoon itself. The brilliant series that he did on the emerging differences between Indira Gandhi, then the Prime Minister, and Nijlingappa, Kamaraj, and others who were opposed to her or represented another kind of more right wing Congress view, was in the series that he did on the AICC sessions, both in Bangalore, Lal Bagh, the famous session in which she produced her version of what she believed should be the economic future of India, and eventually leading to the split. In that cartoon, which depicts the Lal Bagh, which is such an iconic structure for people who live in Bangalore, he shows the two politicians who are looking at this flower representing Indira Gandhi, referred to as Ek Phool Do Mali. And those of you who know that film from 1969 will remember that it was a blockbuster, and that therefore he was tying together a cinematic history with the history of that moment, which led to significant transformations in the relationship between the Congress Party and the government. Now, as a historian, I might ask, what does this tell us about the very small cosmopolitan elite whom Abu was unself-consciously addressing? Because there is no doubt, first of all, it was an English-speaking elite, which is itself a small body of a part of our society, but also people who shared this cultural capital. The reason why I listed out these kinds of references to you was to emphasize how small that group might have been that understood these allusions and references and puns. What does it allow you to decode about that moment? His moment, really speaking, what does it tell us about his times? What kind of privilege was as yet unchallenged is what I would ask. Because, of course, we know that this challenge would come much later. In 2012, for example, when the 1949 cartoon of Ambedkar by Shankar caused a huge disruption in our very, very segmented public sphere. I'm referring to the cartoon which portrayed Ambedkar, which was used as illustrative material in the NCERT political science books and had to be withdrawn due to protests that were launched by very offended Dalit groups. There was, in other words, many years later, so many years after the cartoon was produced, a new adjudication of meaning of that cartoon itself. And I think we all have that responsibility as historians, but also as people who simply view this body of material, to try and understand the context in which it was produced, but not to excuse any kinds of absences or silences or swipes that were unself-conscious for that time. In fact, this title, Not Just a Laughing Matter, is taken from, is a take-off from the book called Not Just a Laughing Matter, which was an extended critique of all the Ambedkar cartoons that were produced between the 1930s and the 1950s by Shyam Sundar. So he does this analysis. So in that moment, we saw groups who were aligned with ideas of artistic freedom, and there were groups who were actually defending artistic freedom in, again, I would say, an unself-conscious way, which is not appropriate anymore in our times. There is another value today to emplacing Abu in his times. What aspects of democracy was Abu able to take for granted? We all know that he is considered one of the most significant commentators of that dark moment in our recent past, the 2 years, the 21 months of emergency. But at this moment of democratic backsliding, but also a time when there is a growing industry, as it were, of hurt sentiments, supported by an overtly majoritarian state, we may see Abu's cartoons as an assertion of democratic freedom. He loved to draw animals, as you all know, and you will see on these walls. But his favorite animal was the cow. And in particular, he drew the cow in many ways. He drew it in a very sympathetic, empathetic way. He drew it in a very critical way. But always the cow was occupying this space of being a critical commentator on what was unfolding around it, around her, I should say. There is one, for example, one cartoon in which the cows are affronted by the adulteration of tallow by Vanaspati. Those of you who know what I'm referring to will find that something really amusing. And, I'm able to stand here and speak to you today about this body of work because a small window of opportunity has opened up since June 4th. And we are able to breathe a little freer. We are not yet stably back to days of democracy, but nevertheless, it is an opportunity. We live in a land where the prohibition of cow slaughter has become far more important than the prohibition of manual scavenging or untouchability. So it's a very different time we inhabit from the time that Abu was so careful and critical a commentator about. Abu was boldly able to refer to what MP Khandekar had warned about in his interventions during the Hindu Code Bill, that the cow would be declared as a divine being if the orthodoxy had its way, and indeed the orthodoxy has had its way today. And Abu also gently mocked the massive and violent anti-cow slaughter agitation of 1966 in tagging the cow in one of his cartoons as Mrs. India, because 1966, some of you may remember, was also the year when India won the Miss World title. So there was this, Rita Faria, in case you're wondering, in a double reference to, both Rita Faria's win of the Miss World title that year and to this, one of the largest anti-cow slaughter agitations that happened on the doorsteps of the parliament in 1966, leading in very violent sort of suppression. I don't think I have too much time left to me because I've already spoken, I think, for about 15 minutes. So I'm not going to say the more obvious things, the more obvious parallels that can be drawn between the period that he illustrated so vividly and so broadly in his work between 69 and 84, the period of Mrs. Gandhi's rise and rule. He was one of the most acute, commentators of that period. Many of the annotations that I have been able to do cover that period, so I will not repeat that. There is a small book accompanying this exhibition that some of you may wish to consult. But just to say this one thing, that one of the interesting things that Abu writes about is that he experienced pre-censorship only for a very brief period. He did not have to deal with the pre-censor a few months after the onset of emergency. Now, he does not say much more, so we don't know whether this is in fact something that he was a special favor that was done to him, or whether that was indeed a certain laxity on the part of the state. Because remember, this was a state that had censored, and I'm just giving you a small list of the kinds of things it censored: quotations from Gandhi, quotations from Tagore, quotations from the Gita. These were all subject to censorship in the days of the emergency. As I said, we can draw very obvious parallels, and many have done it. Arvind Narayan has written an entire book that talks about the undeclared emergency, so I'm not going to go into that so much as to say that Abu really holds up the mirror to us, not only of the political foibles of the time, but it allows us to, in some ways, think about an era in which he spoke and wrote, and believe me, he wrote extremely well too. So the cartoon is an interesting thing because, of course, it is not only relying on the quality of the line, and we all know he was the master of the line drawing, but also on the quality of what is actually written in that cartoon. I came across one critical comment on the Abu exhibition in Calcutta, which said, too much text, which is really surprising because, of course, early cartoons did use a lot of text. But he uses it very pithily, very, as I said, sharply to make his point, and nothing is in excess, either in the line or in the language that is used. I'll stop here, and perhaps questions will come up in the panel discussion that we can address at more length based on what you hear from the others as well. Thank you.
Our next speaker is cartoonist and author E.P. Unni, who has come to us from Palkat in Kerala. After graduating in physics and a brief stint as a banker, he joined cartooning in 1977 as staff cartoonist with The Hindu in Chennai. After 12 years, he moved to Delhi to join the Sunday Mail and went on to work for the Economic Times from 1993 to 1996, when he joined the Indian Express, where he's the chief political cartoonist. Between cartoons, he travels, reports, and sketches. He's published several books, including A Doodler's Journey Through Kerala, Santa and the Scribes, The Making of Fort Kochi, and Back with a Punch, R.K. Lakshman. His work has been exhibited internationally, and he was awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Indian Institute of Cartooning in Bangalore. Before I invite the other panelists on stage, Unni would like to run through a few of the peers of Abu Abraham, so setting his work in context. Mr. Unni.
Morning. Thank you for this invite. I'll not be making a speech. I'll just show you some slides. Next, yeah. These are in our days when we grew up on these three signatures. We're very familiar. You didn't even need the byline. Abu, Vijayan, and Puri. These were the three major cartoonists who defined what came to be known as editorial cartooning in India. Before that, we had political cartoons, but there were three editorial artists who sharpened the comment in Indian cartooning. Abu has to be seen in this context. I'll show you just three cartoons as teasers. We'll be making references to these cartoons. Please remember them as we proceed with the panel discussion. Next. This is Abu. This is the most Indira-centric prime ministerial kind of era in the 60s and 70s. You show how Mrs. Gandhi handled almost everything and crippled the states. And you find in the corner Karunanidhi questioning her. This is very important. Abu did not just focus on the Delhi-centric Mrs. Gandhi. He panned his camera to the states. This is one point I would like to make when we discuss Abu's work. Next. This is again his peer, Rajinder Puri. Same view of Mrs. Gandhi, but saw the whole thing as Mrs. Gandhi. There was no one else in the frame. This is one interesting departure these cartoonists. You find this difference in these two cartoonists. One person also noticed Mrs. Gandhi, but never quite moved away from the federal context. Another cartoonist making similar comments kept on focusing on just Mrs. Gandhi. So the cartoon frame became, in my view, a little deprived, which did not happen in Abu's case. Next one. O.V. Vijayan. Again, focuses on Mrs. Gandhi, but in a very different context. He saw Mrs. Gandhi as a variation from Gandhi and the kind of independence values that the movement fought for, the Congress fought for or stood for. Mrs. Gandhi, in fact, split the Congress in Bangalore here. That's the Bangalore connect in this cartoons. But Vijayan shows Mrs. Gandhi as somebody who deviated from the basic Congress values. Again, focusing repeatedly on Mrs. Gandhi. There's one thing Abu did not do, despite the fact that the politics was all the time centered around her. He managed to look at what was happening in the States, what was happening around her, the kind of crowd that was gathering around her. And he kept wondering about the kind of political choice that was, the sheer devaluation of political choices that was being thrown up. I think I will stop here because the next set of cartoons, yeah. I think these areas have been covered by Janaki now, Parkalam. So I think I'll leave at this. Can I? Go on. Okay, fine. Again, the same thing. You find Miss Gandhi with a host of state leaders. You can see N.T. Ramarao, Jyoti Basu, Ramakrishna Hegde, MGR, Pranab Kumar Mukherjee, Achyuta Menon and Miss Gandhi. It was only Abu who kept this federal picture in focus all the time. Devarajaris. D.K. Barua, whose claim to fame is that famous one-liner, India is Indira, Indira is India. Bas. Thank you. Shall we get into the panel discussion now? Yeah.
Thank you, Uni. Uni always says he grew up on Abu Abraham, following his work daily ever since he came back from England, and says, I am a reader of Abu Abraham. Right? That's what he said to me yesterday. So before I invite the other panelists on stage to briefly introduce them, Gokul Gopalakrishnan is a cartoonist and comic art researcher from Kerala who has extensively published in both the popular and academic press. He's drawn editorial cartoons for the Deccan Chronicle, comic shorts for the Mint, Yoda Press in Mantaray, and a long-running Sunday comic strip for the New Indian Express. He primarily writes on the history of cartooning and the narrative semiotics of comic art. He was one of the prize winners of the 2015 Maya Kamath Award for editorial cartooning and a recipient of the India Foundation of the Arts, India Foundation for the Arts grant to research G. Aravindan's iconic Malayalam comic strip. He's also the curator of 2 comic art shows, Flâneur in the City with Gallery Sky in Bangalore and Flâneur in Kochi at David Hall in Fort Kochi. Journalist and author A.S. Selvan is a fellow at the Roja Muthaya Research Library and head of its Center for Study in Public Sphere. He served as the reader's editor of The Hindu, an independent internal news ombudsman for nearly a decade. He is a regular columnist, journalism teacher, and adjunct faculty at the Asian College of Journalism, Chennai. With wide experience in both print and television journalism, he was a fellow of the Reuters Journalism Fellowship Program at the University of Oxford. He's authored an extensive biography of M. Karunanidhi, published by Penguin Random House in 2021. The Tamil version was published in December 2022. The government of Tamil Nadu awarded him the GU Pope Award for his literary and journalistic contributions. Our moderator today is journalist and author Rohini Mohan. She's been a political journalist for 20 years. Based in Bangalore, she writes on human rights and politics. She's written for publications including the New York Times, Harper's, Time, The Hindu, Economic Times, Foreign Policy, The Caravan, and Huffington Post. She's the author of The Seasons of Trouble, an award-winning nonfiction book on post-war Sri Lanka, and Mission Cycle, a children's book set in Kashmir. So I now invite all of the panelists on stage.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to have everyone here on Sunday morning. I'll get right to it because I know that some of you have not seen the exhibit above, and I don't want to deprive anyone of actually having spending some time on that before you rush off to lunch. But because I want you to have a look at the second floor, where I had the privilege of seeing it a month or two before when it showed in Cochin, where I happened to be visiting. And I spent some time there, and a lot of this is there upstairs and also at the cartoon gallery down the road in MG Road. What it struck me as someone who is seeing the cartoons, much of it for the first time, because I didn't grow up reading the Indian Express, both because I grew up in Bangalore and also because it was Abu's cartoons came at a different time before I began reading the newspapers. And one of the things that struck me is how much of it is still relevant today. And you could tell that from what Janaki's talk also went into. And that relevance is sometimes depressing, sometimes, as Abhijit, who was watching, who was seeing the things in the morning today, also said it's reassuring. Some of it is as a cycle of time, cycle of politics. It's quite reassuring sometimes. But it also reminds us that a lot of what happened before, something for me at least, it was something that a lot of it I didn't know. And this federalism that Unni talked about was not just the focus because it just kind of it was a broad lens, but it was also that he has recorded characters that for many of us have disappeared from memory. And when I look at the cartoons, I remember them again. And because some of their pictures, like some of the way he depicted them, you will never forget it. Like Nijalingampa, presented as a sulking fish, is something I will never forget. And after that, I went back to look at his picture. I googled his picture because I know his name. I'd never seen his photo. And when I saw his picture, I thought, oh my God, it's like he just drew from the picture, except he draws him as a fish every time. Uh, Let me get straight to it, and I'll start with Unni because he's one of our living star cartoonists in newspapers. So I want to know, yes, so there's some clapping. I want to know what it is like to, one of the things about cartoonists is you're responding to, it's like the first response to history. Uh, and you're doing this every day and you still do it. Do you see your role as a journalist, an opinion writer, opinion maker, or you have a political perspective as a historian, as an artist? Where do you place yourself, and where do you think, because you know Abu's work so much, where did he place himself?
My case, I can tell you, I don't. Am I audible? Yeah. Uh, I don't see myself as a historian, certainly not. I'm not even trained in history. I see myself as somebody who is reacting to news breaks, in a very raw manner. Unlike the experts in my office who are all trained enough to respond with specialized knowledge on economics, or science, or health, or whatever, I have no specialized knowledge of anything. So I'm almost as ignorant or much more ignorant than my readers.
Come on.
So I mean, I'm not saying readers are ignorant. They may be. When I used to work for the Economic Times, I was told that you have to be careful because most of your readers will know more economics than you do. So that kind of a thing is there. But mostly you react to the news break and you try to react to it with some sense of responsibility now because there's a lot of fake news floating around. That apart, you can't get very self-conscious about your work. If a cartoonist, I think, gets self-conscious, he will not be able to do any work anymore. Because every day you start the same way as you started on day one, many years ago, with a blank sheet of paper or a blank iPad in front. The bulb may or may not flash. So it's the same way it happens. The next day you move on to another cartoon. In days like this, even during the day you move on to the next cartoon. If your news has got outdated, your cartoon can get overrun by a new development. So one is getting less and less self-conscious as you're going on. So that's all I can say. If you look at, stuff like Abu's, with the benefit of hindsight, it starts telling, that's the magic of cartooning, news cartooning. When you look at it prospectively, what will you be doing in the next 10 days, 20 days, you can't plan. You can't choose your subject, can't choose your leaders. Nothing is predictable. But when you look back after 10 years, you find somebody like Janaki Nair, who's a trained historian, it seems to tell stories. That's the magic of the work. How it happens, I don't know. But when you look back, these cartoons will tell you a story about India.
Uh, Paneer, I wanted to know from you when we chatted before, you were the one who you actually used this thing of star cartoonist. What is the role, and you've worked in newspapers and news organizations for a long time. Some of them had cartoonists on staff, some of them didn't. What is the role of a cartoonist in, how are they seen in the newsroom, other than, free wild artists who are left on their own? How much are they part of the newsroom, and how important are they in the voice of the newspaper itself?
See, post-independent Indian media, the biggest issue was self-censorship. Therefore, from 47 to the time Abu comes back, the 69, it was the idea of building a new nation. A lot of people moved, drifted towards it. Journalists, writers, policymakers, bureaucrats, all of them wanted to be part of a nation building. Therefore, the post anti colonial consensus was there. Therefore, there was very little critical questioning. Therefore, at some level, the 69 split itself is very, very important because it reopened the democratic space to question. Therefore, for me, arrival of Abu actually opened up the space for newsrooms to move away from self-censorship. Problem with the news organization is institutional censorship is only 40%. 60% is self-censorship. Therefore, the presence of cartoonists helps you to fight that taboo. If they can be so pithy, how can I not even respond to it? If there's going to be that famous bathroom Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed cartoon, then I can't talk about concentration of power. I have to respond to it at some level. Therefore, what cartoonists did is they brought back the idea of articulation within the newsroom, which was suffering from extreme and suffocating self censorship. They helped us. They said that, okay, talk. It's not going to be such a big price for you to pay. Go ahead. Question. Question the judiciary. Question your prime minister. Question your parliament. Question. That ability to move away, because it was nearly a 3 decades baggage what we inherited. And that 3 decades baggage needed certain amount of jolt to open up. And that's what the cartoonists did. I think they did far more within the newspaper industry than for outsiders, because they made us speak out. They made us come out from our own self-imposed restrictions what we had to face.
So does it made a difference? Does it make a difference today when many newspapers don't have one of the, as a regular reader of the Hindu myself, I very clearly noticed that there was no display cartoon in the editorial page, which used to be there. I don't know if that's what it's called, right? Display cartoon. Open page, yeah. And I missed it. So other than just missing it, what did the newspaper miss by doing that?
Very clearly, for instance, when Times of India used to start a new edition, the first iconic image which used to come to that city was Lakshman's common man. Therefore, at some level, Lakshman's common man heralded the arrival of the newspaper, which means that the power of these cartoonists was so embedded within the publications. But now these publications are now manager driven. The way in the manager driven one, your idea is to comply rather than question. Therefore, not having a cartoonist is part of compliance rather than questioning.
Right, and one of the things you'd said earlier also about how the Times of India, R.K. Lakshman became it's the paper's identity, and almost until he was there on the paper's front page, the paper continued to remember the common man, or much more often, and after that maybe forgot.
See, TOI and R.K. Lakshman is a full-fledged subject to discuss, and I think we will be
Yeah.
derailing
No,
into some.
I thought it was
Yeah.
a good point
Yeah.
because when which I will come to also later. Uh, this thing of recording, I mean, responding to history every day, and as Uni said, without the consciousness of like that I am responding to history, that I am just doing it unconsciously, fearlessly. But at some point, when we see it continuously, it gives us a different story and there's some impact. Gokul, you were saying that seeing it all together, the stories that it tells, uh, what does it mean to you as and also someone who researches this sort of art?
Exhibition itself, and then there is a lot of, you can see that the cartoons reflect contemporary realities as well as historical events, but as a cultural product, I see there is an inherent duality in cartoons. It is an ephemeral, very ephemeral thing. Maybe a day's cartoon is just a day's cartoon, the next day a new cartoon comes up. It is, as only said, it is a comment on the daily news that's there. But then again, when it's exhibited like this, then you understand that it is much more than a daily comment. It's sort of recording of history in one sense. If I can borrow a culture studies term, as there is a historicity of cartooning and cartoonishness of history that keeps on coming back. So that way, it's a very important. But it's only incidental. This historicity is only incidental. It's a daily response. Let's see it as a very I mean, daily comment to things unfolding. But of course, as you could call it, it's a first draft of history, and like journalism usually is. So that way, it's also important. But it also, the history of ideas, as you see, or the style, or the, it's a communication between the cartoonist and the reader. So that is why, the cartoonists generally stay in a newspaper for a long time, because that relationship needs time to build up between the reader and the cartoonist, and it's a conversation, it's a daily conversation between them. So that is why a cartoonist can, you know play on the memory of the reader and introduce something, and then the reader quickly picks it up, without having, not needing much explanation for that, because that's an unwritten kind of a contract between the cartoonist and the reader that exists. So history of cartooning also is the history of the conversation between the cartoonist and the reader. It's about the reader culture, reading culture of cartooning. And I'm sure we should not restrict it to just cartooning. Even the comic strip, um, the graphic novel, or the long narratives, all exist in this kind of relationship between the reading public and the cartoonist, or the person who's creating it. And once this cartoon is out there, and then how it is read is also, I mean, a cartoon can have multiple interpretations amongst readers. And there are some of the cartoons that only draw, and then I'm a regular reader of Unni's cartoon, and then there are some things that I go back and ask him, because and that, did you do this to just show this? Because I've seen his character started using mobile phones a lot. Earlier it used to be the newspaper that he used to hold. Now, and he said that the now news breaks on a mobile phone rather than the. So these kind of things a regular reader definitely picks up. So it's also about the history of reading cartooning.
Right. Do you want to talk also about the era in which he was when we see it together? You'd mentioned when we chatted earlier about how you felt that it seemed to be an era of big ideas in which he was working. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, in the 60s, 70s, until up to the collapse of maybe communism, or the USSR, it was an era of big ideas. Even if you look at Abu's cartoons, the definite idea that comes out is war and peace. Vijayan also, he worked on this big ideas of, um, I mean, the ideology, the. So, I mean, these were the times where every cartoonist worked on, I mean, because that was in the air. I mean, it was not too postmodern then. people felt that there was a depth in kind of addressing those issues, and they regularly did. So that is why we also find an arc in that cartooning, that there is some overarching kind of a subject or references or kind of a concern that you can reflect in. And that is why it also comes back, as you can see, the Israel cartoon that Abu draws still can come back and inform your idea of what is happening around in Middle East and with Palestine. And even the drawings that he does, the illustration that he does of the Eichmann trials, and then the Palestinian refugee camps, it's just history happening again and again. And then, so these ideas don't really go out of this thing, but these ideas do exist, even though it's much more diverse now. The focus is much more scattered, but these ideas never go out of circulation. So that's what I feel, that they were more, and as Uni would attest, it would more with, they used to draw three cartoons, display cartoons a week, maybe. Yeah, 3 to 4 display cartoons a week, while maybe today's cartoonists would be drawing 6 cartoons a week, with a deadline that constantly changes because the news is changing. The other, in an earlier era, the ideas stayed for a longer time, the news stayed for a longer time. Now you have multiple news breaks on a single day, so it's also difficult for cartoonists to manage that.
Right. That those cartoons, you must see them, they're quite moving, the Palestinian refugee ones, and also the Eichmann trial. I think there's one or two where Eichmann, he draws the 1969 trial of Eichmann, who was, I mean, they're trying him for Holocaust in Israel, and he's drawn without eyes often, and so, I mean, we know the banality of evil, we know that phrase, and then when you look at that picture, that's the phrase that immediately comes.
And one thing I noticed just today, there is one picture where Eichmann actually looks at Abu. I mean, the cartoonist. There is one corner of the eye, it's a very threatening stare. Even though the earlier ones doesn't have any eyes, it's a blank eye. But then he just threatens the cartoon. I mean, it's as if threatening the cartoon. Why are you drawing me? So there's one picture that I just saw today. That is why, when you see cartoonists like Abu or Vijayan or Aravindan, you find new stuff every day or every time you read.
Janaki, I wanted to, one of the, I think in the Kochi, there was, I don't know if it was here, but there was a line, a quote from Abu that was put that said, he had said apparently that satire is the expression of discontent. And that for satirists or cartoonists, they are also responding to, so it's not just where you're depicting power, you're also showing something in that they are observing as common men in society. How much of dissent and how much of from these cartoons, from Abu's cartoons and others at the time, how much of it is actually depicting the discontent and anger, or even compliance of that time? You mentioned a little bit in your talk, and what does it tell us about the health of the democracy at that time?
I think by way of answer, I will turn to what Uni said when he was showing us the cartoons. The very important space that Abu gave to the question of federalism and his portrayal of regional figures. There's a whole series, and it's quite interesting that he chose to play up each of those characters for the kinds of ways in which they dug their heels in and extracted their dues from a center. So, the struggle between the centralization represented by someone like Indira Gandhi and the regional figures who were then emerging, especially after 1983, NTR, Ramakrishna Hegde, MGR and others, a sneaking admiration for some of the programs that were introduced by the regional figures, the midday meal scheme in particular of MGR, which was a refurbished scheme from the Kamaraj era, but he gave it a new meaning by linking education to nutrition. All these were things that were also appreciated. So there is a kind of play on that relationship between the center and the states, where the overwhelming drive on the part of the center was to take over most of the powers of the states, and it did succeed in many ways. But at the same time, the resistance put up by states, we are seeing a reenactment of that particular version of play today. So there's an interesting and striking parallel. That is one element, I think, which is at the level of state and center that one can see in terms of dissent and so on. As far as other elements of mocking, I would say, of political power, it happens with the short and the tall congressmen, and so they are an interesting pair because they seem to both represent two ends of a Congress spectrum, and at the same time have the freedom to critique political power. So they're doing both. They're both sort of representing it and also critiquing it. And I think that's a very clever set of cartoons that emerged from his pen. I'm wondering, and this is by way of continuation from what I began by saying this morning, whether the salt and pepper cartoons, which came only after 1981, were in fact a gesture towards a new public. I said earlier when I presented the work between 69 and 84 and so on, that there is extraordinary amount of referencing to a large body of materials which perhaps many people were not familiar with. The salt and pepper cartoons don't do that. I think there is a much simpler and more direct kind of messaging that happens there. Which is actually much gentler also. It's not actually as critical perhaps as some of the other political cartooning that he does. So there are various kinds of forms with which he seems to have experimented in the course of his life that need to be more carefully examined. Certainly he represented someone who distanced himself from centers of power. I don't think that he at any moment, there is some talk about what his relationship to the emergency and to Indira Gandhi in particular was, but I think that is a little unwarranted because by far he was one of the most critical, commentators of the emergency. So I would say he held on to that, and there is one direct cartoon which I hadn't seen earlier actually showing the pen pointing towards Indira Gandhi. Yeah, so it's like he was conscious of the skills of the cartoonists as having as in some ways concentrating the power of dissent in that small space to be able to focus it, even if the rest of the paper was not able to perhaps do it as explicitly.
And then when we read it while chuckling, we become unwittingly part of that dissent that he is kind of staging, right? I wanted to know about this thing because you mentioned, and I have many questions on craft and what is funny and all of that. And I'm going to ask the cartoonists because I think that's also something that fascinates many people. And given that with time, you've been cartooning also for a long time, Abu also did over decades, he was trying different things when he felt that maybe people don't find this funny anymore. How do you know? How are you keeping in touch with some? I know that much of it will be unconscious, but please try to answer the thing of how do you know what people what they're laughing at and what they will not be offended by, to what extent you can push them.
There are two questions here, I think.
Yeah.
One is, how do I know what is funny, what is not funny? What makes younger readers laugh? One way of answering that for me is, I've been a reader of comics right from the days I was following what's called serious political cartoons. I never looked at the two as two totally seamless kind of, different silos. I found more and more these days when you look at comics or the graphic novelists, Gokul mentioned, graphic novels started treating political subjects, treating politics as personal. All of that has been happening in the last 20, 30 years steadily through readings of comics. If you are a reader of Aravindan, for instance, in Malayali, you read Aravindan. Aravindan was not doing just a comic. It was certainly a comic in the old sense of the term. It was a comic that told a story that developed into the canvas of a novel. before the word graphic novel was known. So these kind of things were happening all around me. It's like a lot of cartooning R&D was happening around me. So as a reader, I could sense some of this. Somebody like Doonesbury, his cartoon I've seen on the comics page got shifted to the edit page. He got a Pulitzer for editorial cartooning. These kind of things were happening. So constantly you were getting updated because it's very young. Cartooning is a very young medium. Cartooning is also very portable art. It can go, it can travel to between cultures and work. All these Western cartoonists in the 20s and 30s made sense to us. Because of that, David Lowe became a hit in India, became a model for R.K. Lakshman. David Lowe was cartooning on World Affairs sitting in Fleet Street. So cartooning is that kind of a thing. It's also very young. Especially in the last 30, 40 years, if you just followed cartooning, that would have been one easy way of staying young. Because you have seen all of this, somebody who was doing a comic strip on the comics page, this guy moves to edit page. Same strip as an editorial cartoonist, he picks up a Pulitzer for editorial cartooning. As another person like Bill Watterson, who was doing editorial cartoons for till the 80s, he develops Calvin and Hobbes and becomes a hit as a comic artist. I mean, all these things have happened. So I have some kind of an instinctive feel of what would appeal to my reader because my reader is like me. I hope my reader will laugh at the kind of things I laugh at. Because that's a fair assumption. That's what I go by.
The character that you often draw, he's also a little bit aged with time. You've aged him a little bit. He was a boy earlier. So you are taking it. And I also want to know when you started your Instagram page. When did you actually start it?
Instagram page. I have not started.
You haven't started?
No, I must start.
Sorry for outing.
I'm on Twitter. No, not. I must get to it.
When did you start the Twitter page?
Twitter's 4 or 5 years back.
You felt that it would reach more.
No, it was also because my office, it was a requirement because we were digital. And so we had to do it. It was a natural extension. The same way as I moved to iPad. I don't find it particularly difficult to update because, I mean, if it's a requirement of a job, either you do it, you can't do it, you give up. So I could move to Twitter, I could move to iPad. I have left paper and ink.
It's a good transfer. Gokul, you were saying you must have observed the change in how people are responding. You said also that relationship with readers, but across styles also. Can you talk about some of those things that you've observed across different Abu and others at his time? What are the different tools they were using, and they also evolving over time in response to readers?
Even if you
and
look
your own work as well.
If you look at Abu's cartoons that's exhibited here, you can see the font changing, the way he writes keeps on changing, the panel outline keeps on changing as he brilliantly uses that persecution complex where that pen is pointing at Indira Gandhi and then Mrs. Gandhi is actually moving away from them. So she's actually moved the outline a bit so that it's not a straight line. It just takes a curve to fit in her head there. So it's complete use of what you call the tools at your disposal when you're doing a cartoon. That your image, your text, and if you look at Abu, I think I will not distinguish between a cartoon or his illustrations and comic strip because it's all the same comic eye that you. It's just a different manifestation of the same comic eye. Even if you look at his illustrations, there is essential comicality to it. It gives you a sense of place and sense of things that's happening there. If you look at Vijayawada, it's a hut in Vijayawada. You can see the sweltering heat that you feel when you see that image, or the nuns partying, holidaying, unwinding. So that gives you a sense of some people who are at ease with themselves in a very private way. So these things are already there. The comic and the storytelling is already there even in his illustrations. And when you come to the comic strip, I'm a huge fan of Salt and Pepper. I grew up, that is the only Abu cartoon that I grew up reading, because by then he had stopped the political cartooning. And but I read a translated version of that strip in Malayalam, which is called as Membodi in Madhrubhumi Ayachappan, and very well translated by none other than M.T. Vasudevan Nair, who's the editor of Madhrubhumi. When the Abu cartoon came, he personally took it upon himself to translate that, and no one else could touch it. So very well translated, and I grew up on, and my own sense of how my idea of cartooning and comic strip has been hugely influenced by Membody or Salt and Pepper. If you look at it, if you look at those comic strip. And Uni and myself were discussing that, and there is no tyranny of the the punchline. It just floats, and sometimes the punchline is not at the last panel. It's sometimes in the middle of the panel. So it is not your typical laugh aloud kind of a comic strip where there's a lot of action. It's kind of a musical kind of a. It's like a raga, which is a slow raga that you can enjoy at your own pace. So that showed me that there is another way of drawing comic strips, maybe unconsciously, and so that has influenced how I approach my comic strips. So that is something I learned very late, that this is I take my style of comic strip from this comic strip, because I really grown up reading that. And very interestingly, Madhrubhumi has started republishing those comic strips again. So I've gone back to buying Madhrubhumi comic just to cut out those comic strips and put it in a scrapbook. So it's that comic eye is always there, even when he's drawing the political cartoon, even if he's drawing the comic strip or the illustration. Storytelling is always there. So comics is all about storytelling. How you tell a story with your everything that is there in the art of comic, which is the time, using space, using text, using sound, using images. It all varies from one style to another, but it's all there. And if you look at Vijayan's, there is that cartoon that only showed that the more we move towards the more we think about the border, we think about we think about the about Gandhi, and then there is the border Gandhi or the Abdul Ghaffar Khan there. So there is a sense of doom, and there, so that story is being told, even if it's a display cartoon. That's a storytelling device. So I don't think we can compare how they approached, even though only showed that it's there, how differently they were approaching, but we'll not be able to rank them in a way that we could see how they were doing it. But they had their own style, they had their own ideas and their own concerns, their own overarching themes. But ultimately, everything boils down to storytelling, or telling a story and communicating it to the reader.
Right. Panindra, I asked Uni about the Instagram page because there are a lot of people who are cartooning today who are putting their cartoons straight online, or they are publishing in a smaller website. They're not publishing in newspapers. Would you see this as a sort of democratization of cartooning, political cartooning? Or is it more complex? Are they limited by some things, or are they freer than a person who's on staff?
See, digital space, what it means for people which are not being under direct surveillance of the state, and for the people who are under the areas which are under surveillance, is completely different. For instance, if you're in Chhattisgarh or Jharkhand or in Jammu and Kashmir, where the net can be switched off, just as a flick of switch. Therefore, for them, it is not digital possibilities. You are stopping all avenues of articulation. Therefore, to what extent can we romanticize digital space is a question which is haunting me. Therefore, till Arab Spring, we saw this as a digital possibility. Post Arab Spring, what we are seeing it as digital extreme centralization, where a flick of switch can control the entire flow of information. Therefore, I still feel that analog world was a truly multinodal. It was spread across. Therefore, I can be a small set of people in Wayanad. I can print out something and I can raise my protest. This idea of reaching out from Boston to Brisbane, but not reaching my people, where the IP numbers can be switched off is worrying. Therefore, for me, the challenges posed by the digital control are not been fully addressed. And if you look at the draft bill, which luckily now been deferred, the draft bill is so scary. Therefore, that's a reason I think these young cartoonists who are using digital space are also conscious of that fact. We are putting it out here. We don't know how long it's going to be there. But if somebody can do it in analog, it might have a larger life. This entire Abu's work, we are able to see it today because it was in analog. If it had been in digital, I don't know what would have happened. Actually, the disappearances in digital, somebody said it's one Bodleian library a year. That is the level of material which are disappearing in the digital space. Whereas in analog, what is happening is somebody somewhere collects it, preserves it, and it comes back. It happened with Bharati's poetry, it happened with Pudumaipittan short stories, it happened with the letters. Somebody had the collection of Pudumaipittan's letter to his wife, which was collected much later. Therefore, I think analog has certain amount of permanency which digital is not providing. And I think that uh, contradiction, cartoonists are able to see it. They are there, we are doing something, we want you to see it, but also try to make it permanent somewhere. Therefore, if I'm going to download it and take a printout, and that digital becoming an analog, might actually that printout in somebody's collection might stay for longer. Therefore, what we are seeing is this contradiction of technological possibility, which is also giving power to extreme centralization. Digital is the manifestation of extreme centralization, and we saw it what happened in Kashmir after the abrogation of Article 370. Net was shut off. And if you are going to say that digital is going to inform you, and if you are not going to have net, what is the idea of informing?
But do you think the space itself can free you in some ways because you're or
space,
you think they need more of a community to respond to
it
events?
is how cleverly we are going to use this space. Okay, I'm a Kashmiri cartoonist, I'm going to put it out. It's not going to be seen by my people. But if people in Chennai, Bangalore, and Calcutta can take a printout and talk about it, somehow it can. Therefore, though this entire trickle down never works, it never worked in economics. Therefore, it's not going to work in information ecology. Therefore, I don't believe in that. But the problem is there's a hybrid arrangement of digital having some sort of a analog residue. The analog residue becomes a memory. And analog residues are not uh, nostalgia, they are memory. Therefore, there's a very, very important distinction between memory and nostalgia. And this is the one which is, there's a old saying that look at what is happening in periphery, that might happen to you. Therefore, I look at what is happening in Northeast India, I look at what is happening in Kashmir, and I don't see it as an isolated happening. That's the reason when NRC or CAA happened, or when Article 370 was abrogated, I looked at its implications and look at what were the cartoons which emerged during that period. The amount of that censorship is what I call it as self-censorship. Therefore, somebody like Arijit's work, which emerged around that time, was purely on parallel media. It was not in the mainstream media. Mainstream media looked like extension of Home Minister's statement in Parliament. That's the reason the cartoonists become so important, because they hold mirror at one level and they also become the window. Therefore, they are both. They help you to be a witness and they also help you to make sense of what is happening. Therefore, they are both windows and mirrors. And that's unique contribution what they are doing, and I think we as journalists, I shouldn't say everybody, we as journalists should learn from there. You and I should learn from them of mixing these two elements, being a mirror and being a window. Therefore, at some level you are reflecting, at some level you are seeing what is happening.
Janaki, I wanted to ask you because you mentioned how and if you would like, any of you would like to respond to this, you can at any time. But I wanted to not leave without saying that for a few years, Abu was also a Rajya Sabha member. He was nominated, and but he was also cartooning, and this is I think 72 to 78. Yeah, so during the emergency as well. So. Do you think when you looked at those that time and in general, this while being so critical of the Congress and Indira Gandhi, he is also in government. What are your thoughts on that? Is it a contradiction or is it a contradiction?
I don't know whether he saw himself as a part of the government. Um, he was certainly a member of the Rajya Sabha. I don't know enough about this to speak confidently about it, but I could say that he definitely did not see himself as a part of the government. He was the gadfly. I mean, he was really the person who um, I think remained at a distance. And I think if I remember the conversation that we had in Kochi, Uni, you were saying that it gave him an opportunity to observe fellow parliamentarians at very close quarters, and it actually
It added
enriched
to his
his.
craft and art, if you ask me. Uh, Also, there's a slight difference. We forget the fact that then nominated members were seen as people who were not essentially part of the treasury benches. So they were seen as people from, distinguished people from various domains. He was nominated only for that, as a great cartoonist and as a critique. A cartoonist's job is to critique the nation, which Mrs. Gandhi knew very well. If at all Mrs. Gandhi used him, it was in a very subversive manner to tell the world, West, that we are allowing cartooning here. And they might have done it, because I'll give you one instance which makes me feel such a thought might have flashed through some minds in Delhi. Only instance, this is just my speculation, is 6 months after the emergency, when it was at its peak. That is when that bathtub cartoon appeared in the Indian Express. I remember having seen it with absolute amazement, and I went around looking for a headline to see whether emergency has been withdrawn. Because we are seeing day after day stuff being taken out, edit pages appearing as blank spaces. And on December 10th, 1975, it was about 6 months from June 25th or 26th, this cartoon appears as a 3-column spread on front page. And I checked later that it appeared in every edition of the Indian Express. It was censored. It was passed by the censor. Even in normal times, till then, the only time the President of India ever was criticized in a cartoon was by Rajinder Puri during that conscience vote era, when Puri Sahib didn't mince any words. He showed V.V. Giri as just a rubber stamp. Unequivocally in his style. That is the only time I've seen the president being dragged into a cartoon. Normally, you don't drag the president into a cartoon. Here, at the height of censorship and emergency, this happened. So, which means that Abu was very free to do what he did. Also, I have, as a reader, noticed that was also the time Abu got increasingly disillusioned with Mrs. Gandhi. He did not come to India in '69 with an entirely negative view of the Prime Minister, the young Prime Minister. He must have been fairly open to a person like Mrs. Gandhi doing something good for the nation, because when he looked at the crowd around her, to him the crowd must have seemed much worse than her. Also, he was away for 16 years, so he came back with a certain freshness. Not that he didn't know what was happening here, but he was not doing cartooning on a daily basis on India for 16 years. So he came back after the fall of the Nehruvian era. He knew that those days were over. It's a new prime minister. The crowd around her was looking, quite right-wing, quite chaotic. So the point is, with all of that, you go into the emergency. There is censorship. That was the time I found him becoming more and more critical and unsparing of the of the establishment. Even the cartoons that he did during the emergency, the cartoons that got censored and which were subsequently published, you can see all of that. So I don't think there's any contradiction. Nobody expected a member of the Rajya Sabha, nominated member of the Rajya Sabha to toe the Sarkar line. There was no whip.
So if you were nominated to the Rajya Sabha today, would you be able to draw like that?
No. If I were nominated, I would be able to do that, but nobody will nominate anyone like me to the Rajya Sabha. That's the point.
Janaki, you'd like to continue
No,
on
I
this
just
point?
wanted to say from the other side of the story that, not to defend her in any way, but there was something more complex about a figure like Indira Gandhi that I think we are able to appreciate in retrospect, given what we are faced with. Um, I mean, we have this famous example of her actually listening to the litany of complaints read out by Sitaram Yechuri as part of the JNU SU and asking her to step down as the chancellor of the university. She's actually patiently listening to this list of grievances. That so there was a certain openness that, despite all the repression, I'm not minimizing the repression at all, but maybe that is a inheritance from the Nehruvian era, actually. The kind of broad coalition that Nehru managed to put together, including many of his opponents, ranging from Shyam Prasad Mukherjee to Ambedkar himself in his cabinet, is something that there's some traces maybe that continued into the period of Indira Gandhi's rule. That tolerance, a certain kind of tolerance for dissent. And on this note, there's something I said I would speak about and didn't, which was about his Abu's portrayal of Indira Gandhi as the young girl. At first, when I saw that series of portrayals, it was disturbing because I thought, is he trying to infantilize this figure? And of course, she was famously described as this Gungi Gudiya by Ramano Lohia. But I think there is a sneaking admiration for the fact that she used that weakness to her advantage in the initial stages. First to gain control of the party, and then to gain control of the government, and then to, whatever. Of course, going to the extreme in terms of the years of emergency. But there is a maturing of that figure, as it were, in his work as well. So I think there was a space of negotiation, even in spite of that repression. I had a question actually, which is to do with memes and what the threat they pose to the cartoonists today. What is the meme, which is also ephemeral but also quite, snappy and critical, do to the regular political cartoons?
I don't think there is any threat at all because cartoons have not disappeared. Memes have been there for 5, 6, 10 years in some form or the other. Cartoons, nothing has happened to cartoons. I think it generally improves the irreverent space in the country, which is good for cartooning. There is so much of sanctimonious humbug in this country. People laugh for whatever reason, even for trivial reasons, it's a good thing. I think that's what it does. Of course, it's a challenge, as Gokul said, maybe the serious professional cartoonist, serious quote unquote. I don't know how serious cartoonists can be, but given all of that, the practicing cartoonist will probably increasingly move towards more ambitious ways of telling a story. That is what I see all over the world. I find it in the new Chinese adaptations of Chinese literature into comic books. Highly unimaginably awesome use of the comic medium with an absolutely irreverent critical eye, ability to connect history, science, literature. These are the new creative areas into which probably cartoonists will move. Even everyday, day-to-day cartooning can also become more sensitive. It can do a lot of things that memes don't do. Plus, what Gokul mentioned, you have one cartoonist in the same, slotted in the same place in a newspaper. Cartoons are meant to be read, news cartoons are meant to be read serially. That is the hint, that's what he talked about. It ends up being a storytelling medium because it's read. You look for your cartoon in the same page, in the same slot, and then you develop some kind of an equation with the cartoonist. So that kind of thing memes don't do. Memes are a kind of sporadic thing that gives you a kick, then it disappears. But that kick is important. I'm not running it down in any manner because for whatever reason people laugh today, people laugh at, at authority is good.
I wanted to ask about this is my sort of final question to everyone can answer. And then I'd like Aisha and Janki to come on stage, and I'll ask Pratiti to introduce them. And they will hopefully also talk about what it is like, what Abu's life was like on a daily basis as his daughters. What they saw, what he did, how many hours he spent. They had some, Aisha and I had a chat earlier, and she had some interesting stories. So around that, I wanted to know some of the process. It's while it is lonely, you sit in front of a paper and draw, or in with an iPad today. You're sitting and drawing, but the reportage is also happening. I understand Abu did interviews, and while doing an interview which is a televised, he's drawing people drafts and drafts till like a very detailed drawing becomes a set of lines that communicate that person's personality, to attending, going on the field, attending trial like the Eichmann trial, going to a refugee camp, and you attend parliament, also Lok Sabha discussions. So when I was asking earlier, Paneer, about this thing of someone on staff, they also do this. And perhaps some others also who are independent, they may be going out on the field. What is the importance of this sort of, and this is my plugged question as a journalist myself, and I admire this very much to do that. This is an expression of journalism. It's expressed in a different way. So could you, both Gokul and Uni, and then Paneer also, talk about the importance of this? Of doing the research this way, reportage, and then you cartoon. You're going to Lok Sabha.
Fine. Not just Lok Sabha. I've done elections mostly. Elections
yes.
more than Lok Sabha. Lok Sabha, they don't allow you to sketch, except when you get a special pass to go into the press gallery. You're not allowed to carry a paper or a pencil or a pen or anything.
Now or ever?
No. For a long time it's been like that. Now they have normalized whatever happened during the COVID era. Otherwise, you could get a visitor's pass or a press pass for 2 days and get into the press gallery. And only in the press gallery you are allowed to sketch, not in any other gallery. You can't even take notes in any other gallery. Now, I was there recently, a couple of weeks back in the last session. So I had to get a speaker's gallery pass and go in and watch the proceedings. You can't sketch there anymore. In the Supreme Court, you can sketch freely. You would expect the Supreme Court to be more crusty or formal or whatever, but you can sketch. In the Indian Parliament, which is supposed to be the democratic space, you can't. In fact, the Speaker's Gallery, when the pass was being issued, the person who issued the pass asked my correspondent who went and got the pass, "Ye idhar aake ko cartoon karega kya?" I mean, this is considered almost a criminal act. So they were assured that I own cartoons. So, but I was looking at it with the cartoonist eye. This is what happens when you go out and do elections. This is an occasion to connect with politics as it is happening, nascent politics. As I said earlier, this is a very raw art, cartooning. Now we are talking about it as though it is some kind of a highly evolved work practice. It's basically, it came from a street art, poster art. And I think it retains much of its power because its DNA is still that roughness, that rough edge. So when you go out and see politics happening, that's also the time when you see your leaders at least looking a little humble and, I mean, lifelike. So it's better to see them as human beings and sketch them if you get close enough to them. And you also, most important thing is you get to speak to people who have gathered. We don't have film festivals where filmmakers see their audience. This is the only time I get to see my potential readers or the kind of people I would like to communicate to. Well, those are the kind of people who are watching this politics happening, so going out to vote. So that's a great experience. And this is called graphic reportage that has happened in its own way in India. It has become a very vital arm of journalism in the West. And I think a couple of years ago, one Pulitzer Prize went to a graphic short, kind of a short novel on Syrian refugees in the US. It was for editorial cartooning. It was actually a graphic story, fictionalized story. So today the frontiers of journalism, visual journalism, comic journalism, these are all acceptable terms. And the frontiers are expanding. So these are different ways of telling a story. It's also one way of getting your readers back. Your readers are multimedia readers. They like the image, they like the voice, they like the text. It's not completely textual. So more people probably look at news, look at what's going on, look at politics more meaningfully if you deploy cartoonists like this.
Gokul?
I mean, to draw a cartoon is a lot of staring at a blank paper, as he used to say. But that's just the drawing part. So where do we get all this? I mean, what to draw, what the reference to make, what are the hyperlinks that you're putting in the cartoon, and what you would expect your reader to pick up also. So I feel that cartooning has a lot of needs a lot of association with other art forms as well. Looking at a painting, or listening to music, or reading a book, looking at linguistics of how meanings are generated by certain words, and then how you use it in your cartoon to evoke certain memories or references to old things that people will have a collective memory of. So drawing is the easiest part, because most of the cartoonists do know to draw somewhere, even though he says that you start being a cartoonist when you stop being an artist. And so that's the first level of deviation that you realize, is that you're not going to be an artist, so let's be a cartoonist. Even same thing happened with me. I used to win all those painting prizes until I was in some 7th standard, and then people started drawing much better than me, and then I said that, okay, now I'm going to be a cartoonist rather than I'll subvert the painting thing. I mean, so it's I always like to recollect like what Tom Gold says. Tom Gold is he's one of the most brilliant cartoonist right now. He draws for the Guardian as well as the New Scientist. He draws on books for the Guardian and on science for a New Scientist. So it's very interesting. Two different. So he was asked, how do you generate ideas? So he said, I just go out for a walk. I walk in London. I mean, wherever he's staying, I think he's close to London, I guess. And then I just sit in the parks. I just look at, I go and sit in the cafes, and then look just the world go by. And at some point I get an idea, and then that's how I come back and start drawing. So the idea of going out, that's one thing which is very important, or which I'm very enthralled by, is the art of flaneuring. That's of what our show was all about in Bangalore and Fort Kochi. Flaneuring is just walking around and then just looking at, I mean, it can be a physical walk, or otherwise like reading books or watching movies or references, those kind of things. So that is the most important part of cartooning, because cartooning is a mixed media kind of a thing. It is not as just drawing or text. It's much more than that. So how do you imbibe all this in your mind is how you reproduce it in your paper. So that is why a cartoonist, when you sit in front of a blank iPad or a paper, you're trying to bring out all those connections or hyperlinks that you want to put it in a cartoon. So I think going out and looking at the world, sketching, getting your hands free, I mean, if you stop drawing someone for some time, then the next time you start drawing a caricature of that person, it becomes difficult. So it's a everyday practice that you keep on doing. It's rather than an art, I think has to do more with a trade. We are a tradesman rather than an artist. It's an everyday practice that you keep on doing.
Bunny.
See, reportage or visiting helps you to challenge your received wisdom. Almost every received wisdom are problematic. And even if you are spending enormous money to get that received wisdom. I used to work for a magazine called Outlook, and we commissioned a national survey for a particular election. And we paid enormous money to this agency called AC Nielsen. We published the report and we got it wrong by miles. And I was asked to write a 4-pager explaining why we went wrong. That's a different story. But for me to understand why I went wrong, I did not learn when I was writing that piece. That piece has to be done immediately because we went with a cover story, we predicted the numbers, and the results were completely different. So we had egg on a face. And to say that why we are having egg on face, there was a 4-pager explanation note which went on to methodology, problems with converting vote share into seat
We
share.
had this whole thing recently, right?
Yeah, all those issues were there. Yeah, but traveling as a reporter, there is one constituency in Tamil Nadu called Uttaramerur. We call it the barometer constituency because whichever party wins Uttaramerur forms the government in Tamil Nadu. Therefore, we journalists generally used to spend 2 days during an election tour in Uttaramerur to understand. Therefore, there is a particular tea shop which we all used to frequent, landed there, and as it happens, there was one agency which was coming there to interview. And this man, the tea shop man, said that he's going to vote for ADMK, and he was listing out various reasons why he's going to do it. So he was convinced that he's going to vote for ADMK. After 20 minutes, another agency landed there and he said he's going to vote for DMK. And again, he listed out 20 reasons. We were stumped. After those agencies guys left, because one such agency is what we recruited for our magazine to do the survey. So we said, what is happening? Tell us. He said, sir, I'm running this tea shop. I have to exercise my vote. I don't have time to think through all these things. These guys come with 25 questions. Therefore, for 3 agencies, I answer. That helps me to take my decision. That sheer insight, what you gained at that day, helped you to understand the limitation of the numbers what we get. Therefore, this entire number crunching which the data team is doing in the newspaper office is so removed from reality because these numbers don't have the context. And the context in the field is so different. Therefore, I think when Huni is doing a cartoonist reportage, it actually captures all these nuances. Those people are not actually responding to your question. They are also looking at their own choices. Therefore, for them, if 3 agencies are going to come and ask them, they are going to actually test out the choices before them, and they are not revealing what they are going to take, what is going to be their stand on the day of voting. They are just testing out the options before them. And we never give that credit to people. Therefore, at some level, reportage helps you. And in reportage, the first thing we discover is that you cannot be a parachute a journalist. You can't land there and come back. You have to win their trust for them to open out. This tea shop person may not have revealed it if he had not known to us, because we have been going there from 84, he knew us. Then he said, he explained it so simply. He said, I have to run my shop, I have to make my living. I'm not going to think through all these things. It's interesting if somebody is coming up with a set of questions. Fit various parties on all these questions and then take a decision.
Right.
Therefore, and there is these survey organizations have something called internal consistency. Therefore, they say that we will pass those numbers only if it is internally consistent. And these guys, if they have decided to test out each parties and answer all the 20 questions with the internal consistency, how do we understand that difference?
Yeah.
That without going there, the numbers what we have as received wisdom. Therefore, a reportage at some level helps you to test your received wisdom with reality.
Thank you. We will have audience questions, but before that, the reason we're able to sit together, and I mean, they'll ask you all questions, so please stay on the stage. The reason we're all able to appreciate and have this opportunity is because of the exhibit above, and it has not been and the whole process started with Abu himself, always keeping a record of his drawings. And Aisha had told me that he would apparently take it back from the printer, what he's given it. So his consciousness of doing that, and then his family to keep. I had the privilege to see how many boxes of papers they have at home and how much they have to go through. So this is no easy task, and so they will come and talk about this. Pratiti, can you introduce them? And they will quickly talk about that, and hopefully also a little bit about what it was like to live with the cartoonist. Not that it's horrible or anything, but just the observation of what it's like when someone does that. And then we'll come to audience questions.
Yes, a big thank you to Aisha Abraham and Janki Abraham, the daughters of Abu, who are the curators of this exhibition upstairs, for bringing it to the BIC. Aisha is an artist, and she was on the faculty at Shrishti. And Janaki is a sociologist and teaches at the Delhi School of Economics. So I invite both of you on stage. Thank you again. I should just add that I'd seen the exhibition in Kochi and said you must bring it to the BIC, and it is traveling forward from here as well. So over to Aisha.
Well, thank you all for being here. I thought I'd just use this opportunity to thank a few people and then perhaps move on to any question that Rohini wants to ask. So I'd like to thank Bangalore International Center for inviting this exhibition, Abu's World. Please do take a look if you haven't seen it upstairs. Uni, Paneer Selvan, Gokul, Janaki Nair, and of course Rohini Mohan for this wonderful panel, and Rohini for putting it together. The exhibition propelled me to open files and boxes, look through drawers that had not been opened for months, and some even years, and plunge myself into a sort of time travel, rewinding back in time, reliving the years of Abu through his work. Not only did he keep everything he drew, every newspaper cutting of his printed work, and copious other documents, cuttings of major events, etc., but he sketched and chronicled the world he saw and knew with great intimacy and with sharp observation, both in India and abroad. A world that he was enchanted with, that for him was filled with both beauty and injustice. This journey into Abu's amazing prolific body of work, discovering the thousands he drew every day, the thousands he drew, because he drew every day for the newspapers, travel drawings that filled sketchbooks, felt like falling through a rabbit hole, encountering new worlds, new perspectives on our father. Because when you're growing up with someone like that, you take it for granted that, all I know is that when I was growing up, I thought I was the only one who had a father who didn't work, because he was drawing. He loved animals, so we grew up with a lot of animals, so he always had to, feed the fish and look after, he was rescuing turtles and tortoises and things around Delhi. And, so he put a little bit of attention into looking after his animals. And then he read all the newspapers that he got from 7 to 10 before he went to work to the Indian Express. And then clearly his deadline was just a couple of hours from 11 to 1 before it had to be made into a block. And then, through this discovery, of course, I'm older now. I don't sort of see him through the eyes of a child any longer. And I have come to realize that for Abu, drawing was like breathing itself. Yeah, and it is a practice like your trade, and I thought it was very well put by Gokul that it's not. He didn't really identify himself as an artist so much. He was a journalist, but drawing was like his trade, and he also had this love for life, for travel, animals, and the natural world. So thank you for helping me in this journey of discovery, a journey that could, for a short while, take me away from the horrors of our current world that unfold every day on our screens. It made me believe in drawing as almost an essential part of being human. And there are, I'll just quickly go through this, there are many to thank. I thank the Kerala Lalit Kala for its financial support for this centenary exhibition of Abu's work. And we first put it up at the incredible Darbar Hall, which was a huge space, and it enabled us to put up a lot of his work. So much work has never been seen before together. Thank you for the art consultant, Aruna Keshav, who's been an amazing organizer of all the transport logistics and the install of the exhibition. She's coordinated the many truck journeys that the work has taken across India. And she has quietly and diligently helped with so many different parts of the exhibition. I can't thank her enough. And I can't thank the incredible Janaki Nair enough for the meticulous historical research and writing for the annotations of the booklet, which is available for sale upstairs. And this exhibition is richer for it and provides valuable context to events long forgotten. I'd like to thank Avinash Veer Raghavan for scanning. He's helping me put this archive together and meticulous designing of the booklets and the panels. Thank you, Pratiti, for making this exhibition happen, for your meticulous planning and editing of the text, as well as your always gracious hospitality. And thank you for Joshua, Sijo, Syriac, Anisha, Chako, Yasha, Shetty, for all their help for the Kuchi exhibition that really set this exhibition rolling. So I'll end there, and thank you all for coming.
Well, thank you all for being here. I'm not sure what I should say now, but since Rohini mentioned the Abu's schedule, I thought I'd just say a couple of things. One is, of course, like other journalists, when he was in Delhi, he went to the Express. Before that, before he went off to the Express, he was reading all the newspapers. So we always got, 6 to 8 newspapers and all the magazines and so on. And he'd be buried in them. He was, of course, very preoccupied, as Uni and Gokul as cartoonists will know, but for somebody who had to produce a daily cartoon, the stress, and my father he had this anxiety. He'd always talk about the stress in his stomach, and the anxiety that you had to come up with the idea, and that there was this deadline. He had to reach the Express and, put pen to paper. But after that, he would generally, go to the press club. He would meet other friends, maybe have a drink, come back, have his siesta, and then go off to play tennis. So he would, sometimes catch an auto, even a bus across, to the National Sports Club and across from Pragati Maidan and play tennis and then come home. But in Trivandrum, his schedule changed a bit. In a way, in some senses, it was similar, but here he was going to his desk. And Pragati did want me to mention that he actually drew. It wasn't quite clear in this drawing, but he drew standing up. He never sat at a desk to draw, so his work was always standing up. He stood up and drew. And he would, after he had read all the newspapers again, of course, as Aisha said, his morning would start with feeding the pigeons, checking on how many, eggs the chicken or the ducks had laid. For a time, he had a goat. That was his dream, actually, when he moved to Trivandrum. He said, like Gandhiji, I'm going to drink goat's milk. And he didn't realize that actually goats, with one goat, you don't get much milk. So he had all these plans. He said, I'll make goat cheese and so on. But the goat cheese never really happened, but there'd be tiny bits of, milk. And of course, when the goat gave birth, then you never wanted to take the milk away from the kid and so on. But then, of course, it became too hard to maintain the goat because, you had to get fresh leaves and so on, and they needed somebody to help take care of the goat. But there were lots of other animals. I mean, he was feeding fish, and that was one of his dreams again. When he moved to Trivandrum, he had tilapia and carp in this courtyard in the middle of the house, which had been designed by Baker. So he would feed them and observe all his animals, and then read the papers. But because he had started syndicating his work, he wasn't doing the daily cartoon anymore. And so he was doing a column and often sometimes a drawing that would go with the column. And that was once a week. So like all journalists, of course, he was very, very disciplined about when he had to start writing, when he had to, and he'd say, it's Wednesday, it's important, this is the day I have to start writing. Until then, in the evenings, he'd be reading for his article. But he loved traveling. And I mean, I guess for Aisha and I, that's a precious part of our childhood, is that we traveled across the country. We traveled by train as a member of parliament, and then as next member, he had a free railway pass, and he, of course, loved using it. He'd always have that in his pocket. So we traveled a lot. He loved food, and he used to cook. I mean, we always faulted him on, leaving the kitchen messy, but he used to make, he loved pork vindaloo, and he had learned to make certain things on his travels. And I think when he was in England, so he'd make this chicken liver pate or tar masalata and all these, exotic things. But he liked that, even a biryani. But of course, he liked reading cookbooks, but he would make fun of the cookbooks, which would say, and he'd go on, about that. He'd say, that cookbook that says fry this and put aside, fry this, put aside. And, he loved this one dish, easy to make kind of cooking. Yeah. What else? I mean, I guess that these were all, important, and there's so many people here in the audience who knew him. I'm looking in particular at Vasu and Amu, who, shared with that sense of the excitement of travel and the everyday, and of course, later on, the anxieties of the times. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. The reason we did this thanking before was that no one trusted that you people will stay, right? So that's why we had to do this a bit in the middle and not have the flow, which would have been great. Please raise your hands. A mic will come to you. If possible, introduce yourself in short, maybe your profession, so we know where the question is coming from, if possible. Yeah.
My name is Rajesh, just a regular guy who likes cartoons. I had a question for the panelists, and also if Aisha and Janaki could comment. A lot is said about the process of creating the cartoon. I'm also interested in understanding the feedback to a cartoon, especially prior to Instagram and Twitter, when you couldn't really, I suppose now cartoonists can read the comments below their post to see how people are reacting to the cartoon. If the panelists could talk about what would be the feedback to the cartoonist. And I'm particularly interested if Aisha and Janaki remember their dad either sharing that he got something right or he got something wrong or something like that.
That's sort of hard for me to recollect now. I do remember the process of him drawing, because sometimes when we wanted attention, he was not able to give it to us, or, he would be short with us, or, but the reception of the work, But you know, the one thing, I mean, he did really thrive on having you know, being complimented for his drawings. You know, what we do have are a lot of letters from people. It was an age and era of letter writing. And people actually, if they appreciated a cartoon, they wrote. And there are inlands, there are those little 15 paisa cards, yellow cards. And then, of course, even, you know, politicians like El Kedwani too has written to him saying, you know, our politics may be different, but that was it kept, you know, it really made me laugh. So we do have a lot of letters that reflect that appreciation of cartoons that were being seen.
Uni, you want to? How do you know where the feedback is coming from?
Nothing much to. Somebody is offended, the feedback will come, but for sure. That comes very fast now. I think that is what mostly. It does happen. People do call up. People leave word with mostly your correspondents or your editors who are we are backroom people. You know, we don't circulate very much except when we go out to report occasionally. So cartoonists, as a newspaper cartoonist, I get most of my feedback from my reporters. They come back and tell me that somebody didn't like your work, somebody liked your work. Don't see this guy for the next 20 days because he's angry with your work, that kind of a thing. There are also very serious readers who regularly write to you now, email to you. There are quite a few who are very vigilant, so you've got to be very careful about those readers. They're very good readers. They like your work. They're also very critical about your work. That kind of readership is emerging now. That's good.
There.
Hi, thank you for a wonderful panel. I am Neha. I teach at Vidyashilp University and my research has been on political cartoons during the emergency years. So that's where my interest comes from. I have two quick questions. The first one to Mr. Unni. As a cartoonist, and in the context of what Mr. Gopalakrishnan mentioned, the flaneur aspect of a cartoonist, I would like to know how does a cartoonist make a decision whether or not to have what we call stock figures in the cartoons. So Abu, for example, had the tall and the short congressmen as stock figures, while certain other cartoonists don't. So does that, what leads to that choice? How do we make that choice and what are the implications of it? And how do the image and the text kind of come together either in harmony or in irony with each other for you to produce humor? The second comment is to Professor Nair. The Games of Emergency, the anthology which was published in 1977, right after the emergency was lifted, shows us so many cartoons which were censored out, which were not allowed to be published by the censor during the emergency. At the same time, Abu writes in the same anthology, I was mostly allowed to carry out my work freely. I don't know why, and I'm actually not interested in finding out. So, how much of it is about him being allowed to carry on freely, and how much of it is about the cartoonist trying to traverse these difficult times? Because if he kept saying, look, I'm constantly censored, he'll probably be censored more because the government will take offense at that. So how much of it is maintaining this sort of disguise of, no, I was all right. However, there are so many cartoons which were also censored out. So could you comment on balancing this balancing act which a cartoonist must play?
Okay. About stock figures, I think in India, it was Lakshman who started this trend most effectively. There were common people in cartoons even earlier. His common man caught on. It was the biggest success. So every editor wanted the cartoonist to do a common man. If you were doing a pocket cartoon, that is. Except my editor, Kasturi. Kasturi said, don't ever do even a pocket cartoon, do only display cartoons. I mean, he thought cartooning is a far more serious business, but that was his view. But whenever you move to, when I moved to Sunday Mail, I had to do a pocket cartoon. My editor also wanted a common man. Abu had a different take on it. Abu told me, don't compulsively use a common figure, a stock figure in the cartoon or an everyman figure in the cartoon. It takes away a lot of space. And if you want to bring in recognizable characters into a pocket cartoon, which I do, which Abu didn't do. Abu brought all the recognizable characters into his display cartoons. I would bring a recognizable known political figure or a newsmaker into my pocket cartoon. So I needed a little more space to work. So I got out of a child. That is another story. But the point I want to make is what was unique about Abu was he did not use a common man. He used insiders. This is the first time I've seen this happen in Indian cartooning. Probably the last time also. He used two practicing politicians from the ruling party to create a critique of politics. That's extremely interesting. These were backbenchers, two guys whom I think they were developed from two characters he used to see at some auditor or some AICC session, always together, a slim, tall guy and a rotten, short person. So he found them funny to look at, and he developed these characters. It was also interesting the way he used them, because they were actually insiders talking about politics. That was very unique. I have not seen anything like that done by anyone else. Have you? No, not in India.
Yeah. Is it on? No, just to say that I also noted that puzzle in his writing on the emergency cartoons. There he says that, and I mentioned this when I spoke, that he noted that pre-censorship, at least in his case, ended a few months into the emergency. And we had a good example that Uni gave of the Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed cartoon coming out actually in December of that year. So clearly he was unwilling to I mean, I'm only speculating here, there's no evidence to prove this, but he was clearly taking advantage of the fact that he was not subject to the same scrutiny that perhaps others were. I don't know, in fact, we don't know enough to know whether there was a distinction. But he certainly did not risk everything by. He actually took certain risks in continuing the critique of emergency as he did. So I don't think there was a conscious kind of compromise as such. I don't think he asked for anything that he was given. That's all we can speculate. I mean, I don't think that it was something that was demanded and given to him or any such thing. It is possible, as Unni pointed out, that Mrs. Gandhi wanted to prove to the larger world that she was more tolerant than most authoritarian leaders, and that it was a useful kind of thing to have your cartooning person who is relatively free to critique you as well. So, I mean, that would be my response. I really cannot answer more definitely unless we see other kinds of evidence to the contrary.
No, I just wanted to add one line. Ms. Gandhi never criminalized the cartoon. She had some respect for the medium, for the art form. That's very clear. No, Shukla was different. Shukla summoned. The establishment worked in its own way. Shukla summoned R.K. Lakshman and personally threatened him. Said he'll send you to jail.
I just want to add to how different artists reacted, cartoonists reacted to emergency. For Vijayan, for instance, stopped drawing completely. Political cartooning was completely stopped. I think he was in Hindu when the emergency was to be declared, and then he stopped a couple of days before. Yeah, and then he went to Malayalam, back to Malayalam. He drew a comic strip in a Malayalam weekly. It's titled Itiri Neremboka, Itiri Darshana, a little bit of philosophy and a little bit of playfulness, if you can. It's a loose translation. But that essentially was a political cartoon. Even though he drew it as a comic strip, it was a political cartoon. It was a reaction to a larger ideological battle. But again, how do you address this? Should it be on a political front page of the newspaper as a political cartoon, or as a comic strip in some magazine, but putting out the message somewhere? So different cartoonists navigated emergency differently. So that's from an academic point of view, it's very interesting that you're looking at emergency cartoons, but you can also look at how cartoonists were using other ways to respond as well.
Thank you, that was wonderful. My name is Akar and I'm a journalist. My question to Unni and to Panniselvan is, what does the decline and a possible demise of print mean for cartooning? Thank you.
Yeah, I think part of that question has been answered by Paneer when he said that you got to leave what I call a physical copy. So the legacy medium to that extent is important, but I don't see why print is shedding cartoons like this in India. There's no reason, because cartoons are doing very well on the web, and all the print editors tell us that what is uh, what is a great possibility in the years to come would be a hybrid of print and web. That is the business model everybody is talking about. But they're, for now, I don't know, for some reason, print doesn't use cartoons in India. There are exceptions. There are languages like Kerala, where every newspaper has more than one cartoonist. There's no single newspaper without a cartoon in Kerala. So Malayalam doesn't, print doesn't. Malayalam, the print is the mainstay, not the web. Print has a huge influence in Kerala, much more than even television, even today. They use cartoons, but I don't find cartoons being used in the English, the traditional legacy newspapers. Times of India puts its cartoonist in the inside page. Never, I mean, rarely on front page of the area. Deccan Herald uses cartoons very well, but does it put cartoons on front page? I don't know. I mean, yeah, anyway, it has a space for cartoons. Hindu used to have two good cartoonists on op-ed page. They've stopped both of them. I don't see why it's happening. I have no reason. In the Indian Express, we have continued to do it. The newsroom seems to be, I mean, very happy with it. And I don't see, I have not sensed any pressure from within the organization or outside. Outside, I wouldn't know. The pressure would be on the publisher or the editor. Within the organization, everybody likes a cartoon. As I said, my colleagues who write and who also draw, the other illustrators who do broadcast, they all like cartoons. So I don't know why cartoons are not being used in print.
See, cartoons are like Nadaswaram in classical music. You go to any musical organization, they say, oh, we respect Nadaswaram, but they will never give prime time. You talk to any music association and that secretary of a sabha will say that, oh, we respect Nadaswaram. But why not have prime time? Same thing applies for a cartoon. Talk to any editor, they'll say that cartoon brings in so much of value. I have never met a single editor who is not willing to value cartoon. But that value is never getting translated into prime time. In this case, front page or edit page. Therefore, the fate of Nadaswaram has been extended to cartoon. Partly because now we are talking about emergency cartoons. Let's look at two instances what we witnessed recently. One is demonetization, another one is abrogation of Article 370. What were the number of cartoons? For emergency, we have so much of body. It's an Indian language is cartooning as well as an English cartooning. Indian languages cartooning during emergency is 10 times more than the English language cartooning. For somebody like Chellappa, who did it for Murasoli, and that cartoon which went all the way to Newsweek magazine, where Mrs. Gandhi it's a paneled cartoon, Mrs. Gandhi is slowly getting metamorphosed into Hitler. This was when you are looking back, emergency seems to be the most articulate moment for us. Because now, on these two issues, I was trying to look at cartoons on demonetization. I couldn't really get much. I was trying to look at cartoons on abrogation of Article 370, not much, compared to what emergency produced. Therefore, this internal silencing, that's what I am really worried about. I think the problem today is only 60% institutional censorship. 40% is the internal censorship what Indian media is exercising. It has to come out of that first. I don't know whether I answered, but
Sorry, is this the last question, Sandhya? I don't know. Anyway, my name is Indira Chandrasekhar, and I first want to compliment and thank Janaki and Aisha for bringing this incredible exhibition together. And the value of the archive is really emphasized by this exhibition. In a tropical country, nothing survives, and you have held all these pieces together. So thank you. I'm so glad, Vikram, that I don't know where you are, that we managed to connect about it, and that we had this conversation that it should come to the BIC. So that's wonderful. So my question actually, oh, sorry, I do have a small comment about the Nadaswaram. Actually, the Gayan Sabha in Bangalore always started with Chinna Maulana Sahib for the Ram Navami celebrations. So the Nadaswaram was given full attention there. I had a question actually which relates to craft of art and cartooning, because Rohini, you commented on the moving aspect of the portraits from the refugee camps in Palestine that Abu did in 1967. And they are really portraits where you need this kind of profound empathy and sympathy to read a person's personality. And then with cartooning, you have this amazing different kind of craft where you use the line to create your character, be it Mrs. Gandhi, or your often occurring character, be it Mrs. Gandhi or Nixon or who have you, where you draw the character immediately recognizable, their face is recognizable, and yet they're embedded with so much personality. And so I was very curious about this transition from art to craft, where you see a personality in a face, but you're also commenting on their political personality so specifically. So that was my question. To who? To the cartoonists.
Caricaturing and if when you're drawing a cartoon I think it's even though related, a bit different from each other when you're drawing a caricature for being displayed as a caricature. Only draws it for the talk that people give in Indian Express, the idea exchange. He draws a card. That caricature is more as you said. Some of them are very identifiable figures, some are not, and then how you manage to get not only just the resemblance, but the personality behind that thing. The other one, when you put out your usual daily cartooning, is very recognizable figures, and you can, how Abu used, as we all said, that the fish imagery for, and it's recognizable in an instant that's the person that he's referring to. So when you come to political cartooning, it's as I said, a daily business. So you kind of reduce a person to a certain image, but having all the characters that you want to put it in. And then that's also a limitation because you're doing it daily. So that character becomes a certain kind of an image that can be done very quickly. But it also carries a lot of their own personal quirks, like how they hold their hand, or how they put the pen on their pocket, or how they would stand and how they would lean. So all those things but it's an everyday business. So you kind of bring everything into that single person over a time. So if you keep on drawing a person, it becomes very easy after some time to draw that person and very quickly. And if you stop drawing that person, it becomes extremely difficult to go back to the same level of. That's what I said. It's a kind of a tradesman kind of an experience. But the other one, if you're drawing you're trying to get that moment. A very interesting thing that Uni told me once was he drew the people coming out of a mass from a church in Fort Kochi. That's the Basilica of Fort Kochi. So he drew it across 3 hours, 3.5 hours, hour and a half, and then it was evening. So there was a tree, and then there were birds sitting on it. They were fly away. So what remains at the end of all this exercise is not just one snapshot of that thing, but it is across what happened across 1.5 hours. So you're trying to internalize that thing and bring that into existence, not just that one photograph that you have. It's whatever that happened during your process of drawing. So I think caricaturing is also a bit like that. You're trying to catch the essence of that person, or on the what context you're drawing that person. That is also very important. Yeah, that's
Just one line, like a raga, it matures. No, the raga, you keep improvising. That's the best way you can put it. You start doing a Nijalangappa phase or an Indira Gandhi phase. The first 10 years it changes. Like a musician, it changes, but it remains coherent.
I think we are out of time. Is there a question? Okay, we are out of time. Sorry, what? I don't understand that.
I have the last
There's
question.
one question.
My name is Anohita, and I belong to the growing tribe of unemployed and unemployable journalists. Thank you for a fantastic exhibition and a fabulous discussion. My question is for the panelists. You've talked about different political leaders, including the authoritarian ones like Mrs. Gandhi, having a certain tolerance for dissent and opinion. But the other part is also perhaps a sense of humor. A lot of politicians earlier had a sense of humor, and that seems to have disappeared now, not only at the central level, but even I think wider. I'm wondering what is the impact of that on cartooning as well as on a larger body politic.
Who do you have a particular panelist you want?
Well, on the
Anyone?
art of cartooning, and also perhaps Paneer could reflect on what it means for the
Yeah.
larger body politic.
About the role of yeah, I guess the role of anger and maybe cynicism. There's other expressions that come. No, I know, but there are those. There's less humor and maybe more of this.
You're talking about the public, the reaction of leaders, establishment. Leaders, okay. Okay. I wouldn't know for sure, but the point is that today a career politician doesn't give you any space. There's no space for the other in most career politicians, the way they talk about things. So that the same thing, I don't know whether they're less humorous or what makes them laugh. But the point is, after 70 years of a constitution, 70 years, how many years? Do we still depend on the sense of humor of the political leader for a critical art like this to sustain? It'll be pathetic. But what does it matter if your leader does not have a sense of humor, has a sense of humor? Cartooning should continue for good, solid reasons, institutional. It should have some kind of a constitutional or institutional support. And it should be seen as a legitimate journalistic practice. What does it matter if the leader does not have a sense of humor, has a sense of humor? How does it? But why do I need the prime ministerial approval? The kind of approval that Shankar probably needed in the nascent democratic days. You shouldn't. I don't think we need it anymore. We should be able to carry on silently. Not the cartoon, the cartoonist. The point is, why do we need any kind of reaffirmation from the authority? Most of these fellows today take themselves very seriously for purely economic reasons. A lot of money that goes into the making of a politician today to win an election. So if you put in so much of money, I mean, any criticism is seen as a threat. It is denting not only you, your sponsors, it's denting a huge establishment around, an ecosystem around you. Every leader today is a kind of subsystem. It's bigger than a leader. So there are very few people who can take themselves lightly and carry on in politics.
One aspect what we have to remember is anger. Anger is, I remember once Bowler Prasanna was in the expert commentator. He said, whenever we used to take a wicket, we were very happy. And now look at these boys. The moment they get a wicket, they become so angry. I don't understand what it is. When we took the wicket, we were so happy, we hugged each other. And now these guys are taking wicket and they're becoming angry. Therefore, at some level, this is a much larger one. It's not about political leadership. As I said earlier, the amount of self-censorship which is happening, the type of masculinity which is getting into display, for I can be seen as a person who's delivering if I am extremely masculine, if I'm angry. Therefore, that is no longer restricted to Amitabh Bachchan of 70s. It has become a common icon, and that's the biggest threat. And I don't think that is restricted only with judiciary or political leadership. It is a much larger one, because I remember one interesting observation made by a Supreme Court judge. He said that whenever journalists come to us, they talk about Article 19(1)(a), which talks about freedom of expression. We judges look at 1(b), which is reasonable restriction. And what is reasonable for us may not be reasonable for you, but that's a different area. But you should understand through what window each person gets in. Journalist gets in through freedom, and we get in through reasonable restriction. Therefore, the entire issue is on that aspect of the growing anger is the one which is extremely worrying, and we don't know how we are going to address that.
I just wanted to repeat what I began by saying earlier, which is that one of the things that has happened in our world, in our lives, in our nation, is that there is a greater sensitivity to the fact that there can be no consensus about what makes people laugh. And I think the 2012 controversy revealed that to us. That what Abu was able to take for granted in his rather confined and I would still say a rather restricted audience is no longer something you can take for granted. That there are segmented publics, there are things that make some groups laugh and not others, and so on. And I think the 2012 controversy revealed that very clearly. We are living in a world which is far more conscious of its right to a public space, and therefore its right to define what enters that public space and what can be laughed at. It has had unfortunate consequences, of course, for the kinds of checks that have been put on what we earlier thought was a freedom to express yourself.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for staying, and thank you, panelists, for this rich discussion. Pratiti.
Thank you again to all the panelists and our moderator, Rohini, and to all of you for coming on this Sunday morning. Please do go upstairs and see the exhibition if you haven't seen it already.